everything from here on will be useful. Hopefully that should come up there. There's always these technical difficulties, aren't there?
No, it's up now. It's perfect. Good
Great.
point.
Well, we can leave it there in that case. So as Imelda has said, I am the social theologian at the Jesuit Center for Faith and Justice. So if you want to track our work, it's easily accessible online with jcfj.ie. And yeah, I'm just going to get stuck into this. I've been asked to talk this morning about inequality, exclusion, and racism in Ireland. Oh wait, has that come up? Sorry, guys.
If you just play your slideshow, we have.
One moment.
That's okay.
There we go. Has that come up? Give me a second here, guys.
That's
I
okay.
apologize.
That's okay.
I have a degree in computer science, believe it or not, and it still doesn't really help me when it comes to these Zoom things.
Kevin, if you go to the slideshow and then you click on the current slide or play from the beginning.
Okay.
So just go back there, then I can just guide
from beginning there. So has that come up?
I can't see it now. We can see it.
You'll have to share that now, Kevin.
Give me a second, guys. My apologies.
That's perfect, Kevin.
One moment.
It's bigger than we might.
Does that work? There.
Yeah.
We're up. We're ready to go. Thank you very much for your patience. So, and we're ready. I've been asked to talk this morning about inequality, exclusion, and racism in Ireland. These three phenomena are never found alone. Where there's inequality, exclusion follows. Where there's racism, you'll often find exclusion was there first. This is a toxic dynamic, a sort of chemical reaction of marginalization that plagues our society. Now, it's important to be clear about what we mean. I define inequality as a material, primarily economic phenomenon, whereby our society disproportionately rewards the already well-rewarded. And that generates a sort of hierarchy where those who are at the bottom are left behind. Many of you are very familiar with this. Exclusion is harder to reduce to averages, to percentages, to euro amounts, but it names a similar dynamic in terms of social capital, where certain groups of people face barriers and obstacles to access what is taken for granted by others. Racism, which is a particular form of prejudice directed at individuals or collective communities based around, based around racial or ethnic designations. So today, I'm going to particularly focus on race for two reasons. Firstly, my source material is a little story told by a Jewish mystic in Palestine 2 millennia ago, which deals explicitly with racial questions. And secondly, while inequality and exclusion have been discussed openly in Ireland for decades, there's a newfound willingness to approach sensitive questions around racial and ethnic discrimination. So my example of that is Hazel Chu, who's the Lord Mayor of Dublin. She's spoken about how now there's a, quote, certain openness to talking about race relations, things that were very present, but that we tended to sweep under the carpet once upon a time. So this dynamic that I'm describing where inequality, exclusion, and racism comes together, it's pernicious. A child is born in Ireland, let's imagine, to a racial minority. They face countless small obstacles every day because of their apparent difference. We've come to call this microaggressions. And while each individual challenge that they face could be handled, the cumulative effect is significant. And so by dint of being visibly part of a minority, they're also members of an excluded class. Therefore, their parents are likely to have limited employment opportunities, and that means that they could grow up in poverty, experiencing inequality, and so the cycle continues. Many of you will be familiar with this. This morning, I'm going to draw on two stories, the Good Samaritan and a story about a friendship that was formed 250 years ago between two men, Jonathan Strong and Granville Sharp. I'm going to propose that through these two stories, that one response to the toxic dynamics of inequality, exclusion, and racism in contemporary Ireland is the idea of what Pope Francis calls social friendship. This concept has come to prominence most recently in the writings of Francis. And social friendship is his way of articulating the synthesis that's required between the personal and the political, so that our interventions on the crises of injustice we face operate both at the level of authentic human friendship and at the level of meaningful political and social transformation. And this is grounded, Francis says, on the acknowledgement of the worth of every human person, always and everywhere. So what I propose is that by cultivating an attentiveness to how these toxic dynamics are at play in our society, we can make an essential first step in combating them. So instead of inequality, racism, and exclusion, we can move towards a society of equality, of inclusion, and of mutual respect. So if that sounds good, let's get stuck in. I want to tell this amazing story that I think is much too underknown, which is the story of Strong and Sharp. Jonathan Strong was born in Barbados, a slave. In 1765, as a teenager in England, he was beaten with the butt of a gun by his master, David Lyle. He was left practically blind on the street, like a broken tool, abandoned. Now, a civil servant named Granville Sharp walked by. And when he saw him, he took pity on him. He took him first to his brother William, who was a surgeon, and then to Bart's Hospital, where he arranged for the 4-month stay required to recuperate. And when he was healed, they continued to care for him. They arranged a job for him. They befriended him. Now, after a year, the old slave trader, Lyle, saw Strong in the street, and he reclaimed what he said was his property. He said that Strong was a runaway and that he owned him and that he was going to sell him again. He arranged a deal with a Jamaican planter named James Kerr to sell this human being for £30, 30 pieces of silver. When the henchman came to claim Strong, word was sent to Sharp, and he went straight to the Lord Mayor, and they went straight to the courts. And while it's a long, long story, which involved Sharp having to teach himself the law so that he himself could defend his friend Strong, the efforts of these two friends led eventually to slavery being conclusively banned in Britain, which was an essential but often overlooked step towards its thorough abolition achieved a generation later. So my friends, I start this morning with this great news. The story of the Good Samaritan is true. In Granville and Sharp, we see it enacted in real life, and we see the consequences of that kind of boundary transgressing love and friendship, also combined with a commitment to social change. Now, last autumn, many of you will know, Pope Francis published his third encyclical, and it's about social friendship, and it's called Fratelli Tutti, which is quite a sexist name, really, because it's about his brothers. But I interpret that to include everybody as it's meant to be interpreted. And he talks about all of the crises that we're facing in our society. He talks about the pandemic, but he also discusses the migrant crisis. And he offers a pretty precise description of what racism looks like in our contemporary world. He says, no one will ever openly deny that these people are human beings. But in practice, by our decisions and the way we treat them, we show that we consider them less worthy, less important, less human. And I think that this is a very accurate description of how my racism functions. You'll never catch me using a racial slur. I'll never openly engage in any kind of prejudice or bias. But below the surface, even below my conscious action, my white supremacy and my racist tendencies are surely exposed to the Lord. Our actions are where racism actually functions primarily. Now, I was raised thinking that racism was a sort of horrible disease that afflicted people in the past. You know, I raised on Hollywood movies, I thought that racism was this ghoulishly evil thing men dressed in white cloaks who were riding around terrorizing people. As the story went, this was epidemic in the United States. But as I was raised in Ireland in the 1980s, we were taught we couldn't be racist because we loved Paul McGrath. We loved Phil Lynott. We didn't have those problems. I was born in 1981, so I was already an adult when Ireland began its wonderfully successful experiment in welcoming immigrants. And it's one of the aspects of social change in our society that we should note with more joy, that for the large part, we have become a multicultural society. And for the large part, that has happened without the kinds of protests that have occurred elsewhere. But to acknowledge that shouldn't be an excuse for hiding away from the reality of racism and prejudice in our society. So I never encountered any stereotypical racist opinions from those who were older than me or my peers. But then again, since all my teachers were white and all my peers were white and I'm white, I would barely have noticed if our culture was permeated with the aggressions that we pass off as jokes. Sometimes I was exposed to jokes at the expense of Protestants, but they were a group so similar to Catholics that you practically have to have a degree in theology to understand the difference. And God always has the last laugh, of course, because I went from being a baptized Catholic to an atheist, and now I'm a Presbyterian. So in my full circle, I'm working as a theologian for the Jesuits. So you could take me as a classic example of the progress that has been made within Irish society, because the sectarianism that once plagued our society is definitely eroded if you can have a Presbyterian elder leading a social center for the Jesuits. But we still have to recognize that there's something addictive about our desire to mark people into groups who are in and into groups who are out, groups who are running just below the surface of Irish life. So through the 1980s and the 1990s, even up into the very recent past, it was widely believed, at least among white settled people, I'm sure every traveller in the country could have told you the truth, but it was widely believed that Ireland had avoided the racist illness. We consoled ourselves self-righteously with the ironic assumption that racism was a problem suffered by other people. The Brits might be racist, but not us. The Americans, they're racist, but not us. And if our consciences did prick us about how we spoke of the immediate other in our midst, the Protestant or the traveller or the gay person, Irish culture has ingrained in us this impenetrable defense. We say, sure, we were just having the crack. The crimes we've committed under the camouflage of banter. When I first read Fratelli Tutti, I was struck by how accurate Francis was. Racist speech is now taboo speech, at least in the public square. There's not going to be any Ku Klux Klan branches opened in Kilkenny or Killarney. Oliver Flanagan was a hugely popular TD from the middle of the 20th century. He talked openly in the Dáil about the need to rout the Irish Jewish population. That's the kind of racist speech that was tolerated in the 1900s. Now, Oliver's son is a TD. He was recently the Minister for Justice, and he has taken a completely different approach. He's a vocal supporter of anti-racism strategies. So Charlie Flanagan's example, where he has moved so far away from his father's racism, is a sign of healthy progress. But that, again, shouldn't be taken to mean that we have evolved beyond or overcome the problem of racism. Francis cautions us, it's relatively easy to say the right things, but do we back them up with action? And I don't need to tell you guys, but the temporary halting sites and the direct provision centres and the education that is offered in the parts of Dublin or Limerick or Waterford, where there are lots of recent immigrants. I mean, our actions testify to the deep structural racism that is also enmeshed with exclusion and inequality. So, just skip forward here. So the European Union, with some stellar exceptions, most notably Germany, talks in anti-racist terms, but actually doesn't back it up with actions. In the most recent year we have figures for, in 2019, Ireland welcomed 83 refugees from Syria. Now, Syria has been caught in a brutal civil war for more than 10 years. And I've seen a longer queue outside Lidl to get some household bargain appliance than our entire country can welcome from a war zone that's just 3 hours flight from Dublin. So our actions testify to the reality in Francis's terms. In Francis's letter, he hammers this point home by reflecting on one of Jesus's most famous stories, the parable of the Good Samaritan. Now, if you remember the context, an expert in the law asks Jesus, how can he inherit eternal life? Jesus, as is his practice, maybe you've noticed this, whenever Jesus is asked a question, he tends to respond by asking a different, better question. So he responds to this young lawyer by saying, well, what's written in the law? And the guy gets the answer right. I warn you today that you should always beware of religiously serious young men who pride themselves on getting the answers right. I say that from experience. So he answers Jesus. He says, you inherit eternal life by loving the Lord your God with all your heart and with all your soul and with all your strength and with all your mind, and you have to love your neighbor as yourself. And Jesus' advice is both simple and devastating, because who among us can fulfill it? Jesus says, do this and you will live. And the lawyer speaks for all of us when faced with such a universal demand, because he asks for a compromise. He asks for a slightly easier deal. He says, but Lord, who is my neighbor? He was looking for a lessening of the demands of the kingdom. And Jesus responds with a story that intensifies the claim made even further. And you know that story. Thieves set upon this traveler. They robbed him. They left him for dead. A priest walks by and, well, he walks by. A Levite, a sort of scribe, comes upon the man and goes on his way. Then after these upstanding citizens comes a real piece of trash Samaritan. You know, the kind with the accent and the posture and the attitude of entitlement. You know who I'm talking about. Every society has a group that stands in for the Samaritans, the group that is in our society but not of it, the group we exclude, the group we malign, the group we make live on the edges of our towns, the group we let die young, having lived in poverty, the group you don't want your children hanging around with, the group you expect nothing from because you have decided that they have nothing to offer. But the Samaritan stops. The Samaritan looks. The Samaritan, in the words of Luke, takes pity on him. And there is a revolution in that sentence. We think of pity as something bestowed by the strong, paternalistically on the weak. But Jesus tells us that this person from the bottom of the hierarchy had pity on a good, decent, upstanding citizen who was far above him in the social order. It's almost as if Jesus thinks that our social hierarchies are bogus. And the Samaritan goes further. On a road marked with risks, the bandits could come back and strike again. The Samaritan stops. The Samaritan made himself vulnerable. He bandaged the poor man's wounds. He poured out oil and wine, which were costly. He took him to an inn and he wrote a blank check for his care, promising to come back and settle all of the accounts in the victim's favor. And at the end of the story, Jesus turns back to the lawyer and he asks him, who was the neighbor in this story? And note the lawyer's answer, because I think Luke has preserved it word for word on purpose. The lawyer cannot bring himself to even say the word Samaritan. The same way a few moments ago when I was suggesting that every society as a group, they treat like the Samaritans, they treat like dirt. You and I wouldn't bring ourselves to actually name our prejudices. The fine, smart, pious lawyer can only beat around the bush. He says, the one who had mercy on him. We like to think that we don't have a problem with racism in Ireland because we don't have the Ku Klux Klan. But how many of us would be convicted if Jesus made the Samaritan a Nigerian or a traveler or a Muslim? Francis, in his relentless argument within the encyclical, states that it's regardless of the noble words we proclaim, it's how we arrange our political life and all the ways that we live our personal life that testifies to whether we really count everybody as a neighbor. The Samaritan set out to do something that day. He was busy. As Francis said, he has his own plans. But he let that fall by the wayside when he encountered this victim in the gutter. So policing our language is a noble first step towards a society that welcomes the distant neighbor. But it's a trivial endeavor if we're not willing to scrutinize our actions and our commitments. Francis asks us who we identify with in this parable. Subjectively, emotionally, all of us identify with the hero. We're so satisfied with the fact that we're numbered among the righteous that few of us ever stop to think that in societal terms, we are the robbers and the thieves. I am a Presbyterian theologian. We have a word for people who are comfortably satisfied with the fact that we are numbered among the righteous. It's ourselves. Francis is clear that this parable forces religious people, and I presume most of us all here today are included in that number, to reckon with how our agenda for righteousness and our convictions about what morality looks like are the most likely obstacles to us seeing our neighbor in need of help. We who are schooled in having the right answers are also trained by that very same school to walk on by because we have important work to do. And this is literally the truth. A famous study was done in the 1960s at the Presbyterian Seminary at Princeton. They set theologians to study this very text. And then they interrupted them with various kinds of urgent messages that summons them to a church building on the other side of the campus. Along the way, there were actors dressed as beggars who pleaded and called for help. And almost every single one of those sincere, decent, hard-working Christians passed those men by because they had a higher calling to answer to. Now, if you're anything like me, the immediate response that you have to hearing about the Princeton experiment is to tut-tut and to judge the seminarians who could so blatantly miss the point of Jesus's good news. But let's think into it a bit more. With reflection, we would all recognize that while we might hope ourselves to do a little bit better, there's always a conflict in our lives over who we should be paying attention to. Few people at this conference can explain the war in Yemen, or the challenges of surveillance capitalism, or the long-term climatological effects of methane production in the Irish agricultural system. We're all very vaguely aware that these are big, important issues that someone should be working to resolve. We know something is wrong with the treatment of the Uyghurs in Western China. We suspect that subsequent generations are going to hold us accountable as a genocide unfolded. But what can we say except we're busy? There's a pandemic. We're under pressure at work. We don't have the energy. What can we do? When we reflect, we find that the Princeton Seminary experiment is useful, not just because it confirms that religious people are hypocrites. That's the simple interpretation, but that the simple act of paying attention is more ethically significant than we might think. And I suppose if you take away one thing from this morning, that's my point. Paying attention is the beginning of all serious ethical action. In my own academic research, I've become very interested in how Christians have navigated this problem over the centuries. Jesus never engages in ethical deliberation in the abstract. He uses parables in part because they are inescapably personal. They're about people. There was a son who asks for his inheritance. There was a farmer who had to plant some seed. There was a woman who has lost a coin. Jesus' ethical teaching centers the act of paying attention to the actual people who are in front of us. The lawyer asks abstract questions, and Jesus responds with specific narratives. So the problem we gather today to reflect upon, it's an abstract one, and we shouldn't maybe be thinking about racism and exclusion in theory. The problem we have to address is how race excludes actual people in your town, in your village, in your school. Turning the stranger into neighbor and the neighbor into friend, this is the path we need to walk so that this stuff goes from theory to reality. And this demands our attention. Thankfully, coming towards the end here. In so short a time, I cannot give you a full account of how racism functions in Ireland today. But I can warn you that it is not the caricature, black and white moral fable of Hollywood tales. It hides under the surface. The Irish variant of the virus called racism surely emerges out of a historical ecosystem of sectarianism. It begins for us with the hatred between the Catholics and the Protestants. And we have that in common with the first hearers of Jesus's parable. Who were the Samaritans after all? But the first recorded case of superism in history. You're familiar with the idea of superism? Remember the efforts by the British evangelists to convince Irish Catholics to become Anglicans during the famine by offering food in exchange for conversion. The reason the Samaritans were so despised by the Jews is because they took the soup. They compromised with the invading Babylonians. So Irish racism can be directed towards skin tone, as every single person of color on this island can tell you. But it can also target, maybe it even primarily targets, the white people we call travelers. At least that's the name settled people use when they're in public, though we all know that the names used for travelers in private are much more offensive. Catholics are no longer scared of Protestants, as this morning testifies. But that doesn't mean that we're cured of religious intolerance. I sometimes think that contemporary, prosperous, progressive, post-Christian Ireland is just one or two scandals away from revealing its deep antipathy towards Islam. There's a deep current of anti-Islamic feeling in mainstream Irish culture. So we're not immune from this virus, and we are suffering a pandemic. But the news isn't all bad. To go back to the story from the start, Granville Sharp was walking back to work one day when he encountered Jonathan Strong. He paid attention. He stopped. He took pity on him. He changed the course of his day, and that changed the course of his life. And together, these two men changed for the better, immeasurably better, the course of their nation's history. So the real life enacting of the parable of the Good Samaritan matters to us in Ireland today, because it shows us that the path to suppressing racism and to encouraging equality and inclusion and the kind of society where everyone is welcome is down that road. Sharp and Strong didn't tackle their problem in the abstract. Instead, they made friends. Sharp and Strong didn't tackle this problem just by making friends. They went to war against the oppressive societal structures that replicated this injustice. So thinking about the parable of the Good Samaritan reminds us that ethics never begins in the abstract. It always addresses the concrete, fleshy reality of who is our neighbor. The Samaritan didn't just heed the man and have pity. He put his resources on the line to remedy the situation. And reflecting on the concrete resonances in the story of Strong and Sharp reminds us that the personal, relational dynamic of befriending the other is incomplete unless it is paired with structural change. So coming back to where we began, Pope Francis urges us in that recent letter Fratelli Tutti to think about this combination as social friendship. The fact that we're all brothers and sisters, and that the person in trouble before us is our responsibility under God's sight, regardless of how they came to be there, regardless of what we thought our responsibility was before we met them. The concrete other changes our priorities. So social friendship locates the relationships that we're called to cultivate, and then it does so in the context of the social and cultural and political and economic exclusions and inequalities that we face. We have to fight both of those things together. So I want to finish with just one example of this. I run a social analysis center for the Jesuits, and so I have to bring some social policy in. The health service, the HSE, classifies members of the traveling community as elderly when they turn 40. I turned 40 in November. The reason why is because while 20% of Irish people in general are over 65, only 3% of the traveling community are over 65. So you actually statistically become old if you're a traveler at the age of 40. Now, if such short life expectancies, such dramatically shorter life expectancies, do not testify to the profound racism in our society, then we are not paying attention. We can't even begin to take pity on someone if we're not paying attention. We could array a towering collection of similar statistics to paint a more accurate portrait of the exclusions, the legal, economic, social, religious exclusions that afflict those people who get excluded from our category of neighbor. But the statistics have no effect. They're literally just a bunch of abstract numbers on a page until we pay attention to the people who are actually included. Racism and social inequality are two sides of the same coin. We discard those we despise, and we despise that which we discard. So like Sharp and Strong, we have to fight our personal alienation from the other and the societal domination over the other. We have to build relationships and deconstruct systems. It's the two together. So we have to lobby. We have to be careful about our consumerism. We have to protest. We have to fight the exclusion by every non-violent means available. But approaching exclusion in terms of relationships without the systemic analysis, that's just sentimentality. And the systemic analysis without the friendships, that's just technocracy. By transcending both, we find the good news. So let me close by saying Christianity continues to have potent cultural significance. Jesus's divine yarn about a Samaritan has been badly misunderstood as a banal tale about generically doing good, but really it's an incendiary invitation to tear down the walls our society erects to divide people. So I want to close with some questions to ponder. Hopefully they're visible there. We can copy and paste them into the chat. But the questions are, how do examples like Sharp and Strong help us to imagine a response to racism, inequality, and exclusion? What societal factors might be at play to encourage us to depict racism as a personal failing? By which I mean, why are we trained to think that racism is just a thing that an individual bad person does, instead of thinking about it societally? If racism and exclusion and inequality always go together, then what political, legal, and structural changes do we have to fight for to fight these problems? And finally, how might this idea of social friendship play out in your context? Thank you.
Thank you indeed very much for very inspiring and very challenging. And I'm sorry that we didn't have a whole lot more time to hear what you had to say, Kevin. It's extremely interesting, and you have set us indeed some difficult questions to ponder, but you've given us a very good basis on which we can begin to look at some of the questions that you ask. There is so much in what you say that has resonated just for me in terms of what I've heard, even that we're grounded, that I suppose the whole idea of social friendship and that our brothers and our sisters are our own responsibility. And what I like too is the whole idea of paying attention as being the beginning of all ethical action, and that we must pay attention, I suppose, to those in front of us more so. The challenges are there for us all, and that you ask us then that we must examine the progress of Irish society, and that what really struck with me is that we're addicted to making groups that are in and groups that are out. And we can do this sometimes through the camouflage of banter. So we are kind of challenged ourselves to see where is it that we are at relative to these issues that Kevin has brought up with us. There is plenty to think on. And I might just remind you maybe of some of the questions that Kevin has asked. He has asked us, how do examples like Sharp and Strong help us to imagine a response to racism, inequality, and exclusion? That was the first question. And the second one, what societal factors might be at play to encourage us to depict racism as a personal failing? And the third question then, if racism and exclusion and inequality are always go together, what political, legal, and structural changes do we have to fight for or to fight these problems? And the last one, how might this idea of social friendship play out in our context, being responsible, that is, for our brothers and sisters? Kevin, thank you so much again for all that you've shared with us this morning. And what we would hope now is that we might break up into groups for maybe 10 to 15 minutes. And we now have 100 people online, which is absolutely marvelous. There is no way that we're going to be able to get a feedback from every single group. So what we're hoping for is that in each group that Marianne has devised, that in each group that somebody might take a few notes and that they might send them to Marianne afterwards. And that therefore we can capture the essence of what comes back in the groups. But what we will do after the groups have had a chance to think on what Kevin has brought to our attention this morning, that we might call on 3 or 4 groups given the time, and immediately after that then we might call on Kevin again, maybe just to come back in based on some of the comments that he has heard from some of the groups, and after that then we might take that photograph before we all head for a cup of tea. So I'll tell you what I'll do. I'm just going to, I think we're going to try and put the questions in the chat, but I might just remind you, firstly, the examples of Sharp and Strong, how do they help us to imagine a response to racism, inequality, and inclusion? And the other question, what societal factors might be at play to encourage us to depict racism as a personal failing? And the third one, if racism and exclusion and inequality always go together, what political, legal, and structural changes do we have to fight for to fight these problems? And lastly, how might this idea of social friendship play out in your context? Now, I appreciate you won't have a lot of time to go through all of those questions, but you know, if you manage to take one or another of them, then that would be wonderful. So I'm going to invite Marianne to break us into the various groups. And if you remember in your groups, then to unmute yourselves, and we will come back to you maybe in between 10 and 15 minutes and before we head for a cup of tea. So enjoy the chance to have a chat, and we'll talk to you again in a few moments. Marianne, you might do the needful there, so thank you.
Brian, I'm actually looking here. I cannot see the option on my screen for group breakouts. Do you see it on yours?
No.
By any chance?
No.
Yeah, I'm just wondering what is going on. But if maybe this could be the opportunity to give, are we going on a small break?
Well, the option at this stage was to break up.
To do the breakout rooms.
And then we were going to go into a small break. But if that's not the case, what we could do now, if you thought it was helpful to you, Marianne, what we could do is we could take the photograph now, and then we could go for the cup of tea now, if that would give you a chance to have a look at the group situation. Would that be
I'm trying to go to the settings to see if I can find it. For some reason, I just can't find it. So I think I would need to go to the settings, but maybe we could give people just a 5-minute breather while I try to do that or something like that. What do you think is good? Or you could be taking the pictures on the screen.
Well, I'll tell you what, if you work away on that for the minute, I'm going to try and take the photograph of everybody. So if everybody can give us a little bit of a smile there, that's it. And if you're sitting in the front of your screen, we can pretty much see everybody sitting now. This will take a minute or two, so you'll have to keep that smile on your face just for a minute or two. Eileen clear as I can just see your chair, Eileen. I'll need to see. Oh, that's lovely now, Eileen. I'm just going through. I can see Jacinta and Margaret. Antonia, Antonia is there, but we can't see her face. I don't know. And then there's a few people at the end. Now you don't have to switch on your camera, but just in case you didn't realize, we are recording this, and it is a case we're going to try and take the photograph. So if possible, right. Okay, I'm going to try and take the first photograph. So, okay, that's the first one. Now don't do anything yet now. Okay, I have one. Okay, I'm going to go to the next. This is lovely. Everybody is. Okay. Save as. And oh, I can see somebody's trying to get in here. And the last one. Okay, give me 1 second now. I know this is taking. Everyone, you have to keep a smile on your face for just that little bit longer than you would think. Oh, sorry. Oh. And the very last one now, I think I have everybody at that stage. Okay, and you can all take a deep breath there. There we go now. I think I have everybody. Brilliant, very good indeed. I'll tell you what we're going to do. Just while Marianne has a look to see about those groups, what we'll try and do is we will take a break for a few moments, if that's okay. And it's just coming up to 10 to 12. If we said to people, if you came back to us for 12 o'clock, and then we'll be sure, then we'll take it from there.
I was just thinking, Kevin, when I heard you speaking about that, the travellers, I was horrified. I couldn't believe the 3%. But I remember years ago hearing a community worker talking about at a stage she was working in Scotland, and she discovered that the mortality rate was significantly lower than average. And when she said it to a group, being appalled, somebody said to her, who'd want 10 more years of this?
That's very true, actually. Never thought of that. It's very important.
Kevin, you're on mute. I don't know if you're...
Sorry, I was waffling away there happily, Una, in response to you. Sorry about that. But I was just saying that the language of deaths of despair, I don't know whether that's a phrase that people are familiar with. So it's one of the ways that people are starting to think about mortality in the developed nations, especially around addiction. So people are dying not so much because they have cancer or because they're old. They're dying because they despair of life, and their lifestyles are attempts to cope with the difficulties of grinding inequality and exclusion and prejudice. We don't have language to describe just how difficult it is to live on the edge of society. And I suspect that the reason why we don't have language to describe that is because it's people like me who are mostly doing the talking. So we need to be paying attention more to the people who are on those estates in Scotland, so that, and who are in the temporary halting sites on the edges of our towns and who are in direct provision centres. We need to make space at the centre of our conversation for the people who are on the margins, so that we can hear those kinds of shocking statements and properly process them. Does that make sense, Una? Like the...
Absolutely, but should they have to bear their, I mean, how would they feel about making themselves even more vulnerable than they are to people like us? That we should know, we shouldn't have to be told how awful it is. Only try to...
Absolutely. I mean, you're entirely right. And that's why I'm saying friendship can't be forgotten in this. Real relationship needs to be the point where we as individuals begin. So that it's not a case of we don't need representative kind of token figures from the marginalized classes to come and, you know, become prominent spokespeople, so much as we ourselves who are in the center of society need to have the relationships that give us the proper perception, as opposed to, as you say, like forcing the people who are marginalized and under pressure to do more work. That would be further injustice.
Yeah, I like the idea of social friendship. It's...
Thanks, Una. We're just coming up to the 12 mark, and I think most people will have had a chance at least to bring the cup of tea maybe to the computer, so you can sip away as we listen in. We're very grateful to say that for all who've attended. We have 100 people online. We had hoped to break up into groups, but the technology just won't agree with us this morning. So it's probably just as well, because in this way we won't be excluding anybody. And seeing as this morning is all about inclusion, perhaps the best way to do it is to throw it open to the floor straight away. So what we had hoped to do is ask people to think on some of the questions that Kevin had set after he had spoken. And then maybe to invite some of the groups to feedback. But maybe what I'll do is just once more might remind you of what Kevin has been asking us to do. He was asking us to look at the story of Sharp and Strong, as he had told us, and to help us imagine a response to racism, inequality and exclusion, how we might imagine a response, or to describe then what societal factors might be at play to encourage us to depict racism as a personal failing. And if racism and exclusion and inequality always go together, what political, legal and structural changes do we have to fight for, or to fight these problems? And lastly, what might this idea of social friendship, or how might this idea of social friendship play out in your context? So rather than going into the groups, which seems an impossibility given the technology difficulties this morning, if there is anybody who might feel, as having listened to some of what Kevin has brought to us this morning, that maybe they would like to comment maybe on some aspect of what they've heard, or to comment maybe on some of the questions that Kevin put towards the end, I will invite for a few minutes now. We probably won't be able to get through a whole lot of people, but it would be interesting to hear if people had any comment on some of the things that Kevin had brought to our attention this morning. Pia, you're unmuted there. If you would like to go first, you have your hand up. Thank you, Pia.
Um, I am struck by your words. Sorry, I just have to, about travellers. And there are a lot of things I feel angry about because of their condition. It's not enough, as you say, to say words about it. The question for me is, what can I, as an individual, do? I'm very much retired now, well on in years, so I'm not sure what I can do, but I always feel guilty that I do nothing. I talk about it, but I do nothing about it. There's one lady, a traveller I have met several times, who badly, very badly needs a hip replacement, but she's constantly promised, and then the promise broken that she'll get it done soon, and she hasn't yet. She's years waiting. I don't know. Should I do something about it? Can I do something about it? What should I do about it?
Thanks, Pia. I might take one or two other comments and then come back to you maybe at the end, Kevin. That's okay.
Sure.
Thank you indeed, Pia. Is there anybody else who might like to ask a question or to share a comment on one? Lily, you unmute yourself there, please, and you can come in. Thank you.
And what strikes me, I love the whole idea of the paying attention, and the whole need for political and legal change, structural change. And it begins with us paying attention to what do I actually see in my neighborhood or in my town or my village. And maybe the weakness we have is maybe we don't lobby political figures enough. Maybe that's a weakness with us, that we're a bit shy about, emailing our TDs and all of that about things that we actually see and observe. But it does require us to pay attention. That struck me very much.
Thank you indeed, Lily. Is there anybody else who would like to make a comment or to say, is anybody else? I'm going through the screens now trying to spot a hand up. Anne-Marie, if you unmute yourself, you can come in. Thank you.
Just responding to Kevin, and thank you, Kevin, for a most real and challenging presentation. Just referring back to the refugees in Syria, where we have taken in 83. But also this week it was announced that we had also pledged to take in a number of young unaccompanied minors. And but the bureaucracy, a lot of the clearance is there, but now the difficulty was in the I think it was in the guards, that because of COVID, So these kind of concrete situations, especially with younger minors, I was thinking the last few days, how do I respond to that? Because it's the bureaucracy of that's preventing, and these children are in dire circumstances. But it takes so long to a country, states that will accept them, but then it takes forever for the young people to be admitted in this situation. How do you respond to that, Kevin?
Thanks indeed, Anne-Marie. Is there one more maybe, and then after that I might go back to Kevin, if that's okay. Ronan, did you have a question there? Go ahead, Ronan, thank you. You need to unmute, Ronan, thanks. Sorry. Ronan, that's it, now go ahead.
Can you hear me? Yeah, I was just wondering, where there's a difference of beliefs, does that contribute to possible racist perceptions?
Thanks, Ronan. Thank you very much indeed for that. So you can see, Kevin, there you have a number of different aspects. You have Sister Pia spoke of anger and guilt and wondering what it is she can do. Sister Lily spoke of paying attention and how that resonated with her. And Marie is looking at the difficulties with the unaccompanied minors and how we respond to that. And then Ronan at the very end asked really about the difference of beliefs and whether that is a contributory factor to some of the difficulties that we face at the minute. So maybe I might ask you, Ronan, or Kevin, if you might come in and just give us a few thoughts on what you've heard from the few people that spoke. Thanks.
Thanks, Brian. And thank you to everyone for your very warm reception of my ideas. I think the first and the second question come together. What can we do about it, and whether or not we're shy about lobbying? And I think one of the things we can do about it is on the political level. We can use our centrality as citizens who have votes, who have social capital, and we can express ourselves to politicians more commonly and more articulately. And I would say that the way to do that is at the local level. So it's good to send emails and letters to the TDs, but it's, if you think particularly about the Pia's question about travellers, it's the county council who isn't able to enact any kind of justice for our travelling community because of a perceived political punishment that would come their way. So if you articulate clearly to your county councillors that actually you want to see them provide the services that are the due of people who live in our society, then that empowers them to make the decisions that they want. In the large part, the politicians, even the ones we most viciously disagree with, are trying to do the best they can. So we can help them by being active citizens. That's one level. I mean, there's lots of other ways as well. Then on the question of bureaucracy, I'm reminded of an old joke that I heard when I worked in the Department of Foreign Affairs about the death of a civil servant. And they put a tombstone up and they said on the tombstone, "Here lies a civil servant, civil to no one, servant only to the devil." And, the civil servant can be easily demonized. But again, what we have to recognize is that they're caught in a system that they're trying to work in a humane way. And it's very often a very difficult job. So I think that one thing that we can do is, again, in our engagement with bureaucrats, to show them the respect and the dignity that might lead to friendship. I know, especially in the asylum seeking process, that the catastrophic holdups that we have for people in direct provision is largely down to like really boring logistical problems with recruiting sufficiently qualified people to do that job. So the people who are doing that job have a burden that they can't cope with in terms of work, and then corners get cut and shortcuts are taken. So I think, again, that's back to the political again. We need to fund those systems appropriately so that the people who are doing those jobs have the time to pay attention. And then finally, on the question of the difference of beliefs, Ronan's put his finger on it, I think. And I'll say here, speaking as a Christian, as a theologian, this is one of the places where Christians in our society should be making an active difference. Because of course, Christianity involves a set of dogmatic beliefs that we subscribe to. We say them in the creed. There are certain things that you believe if you are a Christian. And those beliefs are different from the beliefs of secular humanists or Buddhists or atheists. But Christianity has theological resources for engaging with difference of belief in respect. We're able to stand side by side with a neighbor who passionately disagrees with us and give them the space to authentically believe what they believe. So while we are most fully holding to the dogmatic truth of our faith when we make a hospitable space for people who are different from us. This is the parable of the Good Samaritan applied intellectually, to expect that the person who is radically different in belief might also be the person who God has put in our path to reveal good news. So I think that perceived difference of belief is a massive. When I talk about Islam, I think that contemporary Irish society has a real problem with some of the beliefs of Islam. Whether those problems are grounded in reality, probably not. But Christians ought to be the people in society who are most hospitable to those who disagree with us. And that can be a witness then to everyone else. We have much more intellectual resources than secular liberalism, for example, which can only tolerate difference. And to tolerate difference means to not love. You don't love that which you tolerate. When I make dinner for my 2-year-old son and it's got peas on it, he might tolerate the peas and eat some green vegetables, but he doesn't love them. And Christianity has resources by which we can truly and authentically love the person, even though they're radically different from us. And so if it is the point of difference, then that shouldn't be any barrier to us as Christians. And I recognize there might be some people here who don't identify in that way, but allow me to speak from my position. I, as a Christian, see that as really central to my mission. to be hospitable to those who are different. Does that make sense, Ronan?
Yes, yes.
Yeah. And sorry for waffling here.
Not at all, Kevin. You hit the nail on the head, as you have done all morning, and thank you very much for that. I think your lasting message that I picked up from us is that as Christians, we have to make and can make an active difference. And thank you, Kevin, for all your input this morning, for fielding the questions, for the preparation and the PowerPoint and everything that you said. And thankfully, we have recorded it, so we'll be able to watch back again and to share it with those who can't be here with us this morning. So we're going to move on to the next part of what we had prepared for you this morning. And I'm going to call on Sister Lily, if she might come in there, to introduce our next keynote speaker. Over to you, Sister Lily.
Thank you, Brian. And thanks to everyone for being here today. Well, it's my pleasure today to introduce Mr. Paul Frecklington. Paul is the project coordinator of Ard Family Resource Centre in Duishka in Galway. And that area was found to be the most culturally diverse community in the country. Prior to the pandemic, the centre received about 1,500 visitors a week, which says something about the dynamic centre that it is. And the people there, families, took part in various courses and classes and events, which is marvellous. It's considered that Paul at the moment is actually studying for his PhD, and his PhD is based on parent-adolescent relationships in a super diverse setting, an exploratory study. So Paul has also brought along 3 friends from the centre, Precious, Frank and Islamabad, and we're delighted to Islamia, and we're delighted that they're here, and you're all very welcome, and we are waiting to hear what you have to share with us. So thank you for coming.
Hello, can everybody hear me?
Yes,
Paul, we hear you.
I just got thrown out just as you started there, Sister Lily. I got thrown out of my laptop, so I've just come on the phone now. So sorry I missed the introduction.
Okay, great.
I think I'm just in time. So just to add to the technical difficulties today. So listen, thank you very much for inviting all of the team to the conference today. We're delighted to be here, but more so, we're delighted to be including 3 of our colleagues. And I think the word including is really important, because in everything we say, what can we do to make a difference? And just today will make a difference. So just to give you an idea of our Family Resource Centre, who we are and what we do. We've been in operation for 11 years now, and we're located on the east side of Galway City, in a community that was described by Project Life Course 2015 as the most culturally diverse community in the state. Just to give you an idea, that there was 60% of the population from the census identify themselves as other than Irish, non-Irish. And also a survey done in the school showed 41 different languages spoken in the school, and 30 of those were prominent, as in the language spoken at their home. So that just gives you an idea of the diversity. It's a very young population. There are far more families in the Hishka-Roskam area than far more than in the state average and in the rest of the city. 71% of the houses are rented, which is often the case when people are trying to get a foothold in a new country. But that in itself creates hardships and a lot of difficulties that we have to deal with. Part of our work in the centre is about getting that foothold and giving people the opportunity to take a step up the ladder. But I've got to say that is really difficult. And we as the workers in the centre, we want everybody to be welcome. We welcome everybody, but we're constantly aware, and we have to try and overcome this, that people are entering the centre with baggage that they shouldn't really be entering with. And there is, whilst we can talk about racism, the systematic racism is at play in Ireland. And to give you an example, we in the Dehishka area cannot get DESH status for the schools, or cannot get what any other status that would give us extra funding, an easy path to funding. The reason being, we are classed as slightly affluent as a community. I remember asking a former mayor of Galway City, did you know we're slightly affluent? And he told me, he looked at me as though I was crazy, as though I had two heads, and said, don't be silly. The reason we are slightly affluent is because there's an algorithm that works out the deprivation rating that then forms the basis on which government award funding to certain communities. The algorithm in Dehishka is flawed in the fact that when people, all the stats are taken from the census. So one of the questions in the census is have you completed a third level education? And so people will say yes. However, it doesn't say, is that third level education recognized in this state? A small survey of 50 people showed me that 80% of the people's qualifications weren't recognized in this state. So therefore, we are shown in Dehishka that the stats show in Dehishka that people have an opportunity to get work because they've completed a third level qualification. It isn't the fact. The fact is that their qualifications aren't recognised. So we really are fighting against all of those things. When and that's one of those things that hides under the surface. To quote Kevin. And we're fully aware of these inequalities, but we still have to keep working and trying our hardest. Yet we know that people that we consider, I mean, the people that come into the centre, we consider them part of us. We try and operate as best we can, as open as we can. We're constantly hindered by red tape, but we keep trying to make people feel as welcome and as part of the centre as we can. And the richness that we get from that is quite incredible. We really do feel privileged to work with people. I think just something, and I'm gonna be quiet soon because this isn't my story, so I'm gonna hand over in a moment to one of my colleagues. I've got two other colleagues on today, Natasha Muldoon and Elska Bannock, and they're gonna help me with the introductions for our colleagues. Just one story though I remember, and this goes back to a traveller who did work experience with us, and he was assigned to me, and he basically he couldn't get work experience anywhere else. So he asked that I got a call from the school, can this guy come to me? He came and he was wonderful. He was absolutely wonderful. He was on time. He did everything I asked. He was polite. He was just a great guy. And he wanted to work as a mechanic. And I said, look, I'll try and get you a job. And he said, what's the point? I said, why would you bother? He said, I'm not going to get a job. You know, I'm a traveller. And that really struck me. And I've got to say, a few years later, I found him trying to take things from behind the centre without asking, is the best way to put it. It was stuff we weren't using, but it had been promised to somebody else. And the sense, you know, of, well, you know, there for the grace of God go I. You know, I'm very privileged because if I was in that situation, he'd just had 2 children. He was trying to feed his family. He's trying to make, and the hopelessness he felt. So we've really got to work against that. So again, it's really important though to hear those stories and to hear from people, and that's what we're going to hear today from our 3 colleagues. So without further ado, I'm going to hand over to Natasha Muldoon, who's she's going to introduce our first speaker. So over to you, Natasha.
Hi everyone, it's lovely to be in this space today, and I am absolutely honoured to be introducing the next speaker, Precious today. So I'm a youth worker in Ard Family Resource Centre, and I actually got to know Precious through Sister Chanel Canny. She introduced Precious to me when Precious was sitting her Leaving Cert within Merlin College, our local school, and over the past few years I have gotten to know Precious so well, and I'm constantly inspired by her resilience and courage, and she has really become a great sense of support for me in the youth project, and she really helps and inspires other young people who are in our centre. And she is a very creative person who has a real talent for spoken word and poetry, and yeah, she's just wonderful. So I'm going to pass you on to Precious, and I hope you enjoy.
Hi everyone, good afternoon. My name is Precious. Today I'm from Nigeria. I came into Ireland 2017, which I sit for my living center 2017. And I must say I'm very honored to be part of this conference, and I'll be very happy to share my story and experience in Ireland. So first of all, we're talking about racism, but some people might not know the meaning of racism or anything. When reading a book, I came across the definition for racism, which I find so triggered to it, and I kind of love the definition. And it says racism is a belief, attitude, institutional arrangement, and acts that tends to denigrate individuals or groups because of phenotypic and characteristic or ethnic group affiliation. I really find that definition very triggered and very meaningful, because when I came to Ireland, I was because I came as a very young girl, and I was I just felt like alone. Why, even when I was going to school, because I attended Merlin College in Doishka, because I felt so lonely among my peers, because I just felt like, oh, my accent kind of sound different from others, and a lot. So I was just like, oh, because most of the time I always be myself during the break time and everything. So ever since, because I just felt like lonely ever since I came across Chanel. So Chanel introduced me to Natasha, and Natasha made me, she just made me, I think she brought the creativity in me, which, because I was a shallow person, because I just try to always hide myself and keep myself away from people, because I don't want to be hurt. That was it. So when Chanel introduced me to Tasha, and Tasha introduced me to people part of the center, so I found the center to be like my other home, because I saw them as a friendly people, and they're like a family to me. So I was very inspired and encouraged. So from there I started like, oh, I love writing. Then I started helping Tasha. I started volunteer to help Tasha as in the community center. So I must say, community centers is very good, because it kind of bring people together, and it bring especially people that are coming from different parts of the world. It makes them to know their community, and makes them to know people around. And it's also, and one thing I love about the center, it kind of makes you to know who you are, and makes you to make you to know that people around actually cares for you. I know racism is something that is happening all over the world, and even though you've not experienced it, that doesn't mean that it doesn't exist. It actually exists, because at first I'm like, racism, like I said, I've not experienced racism, so even if I've experienced it, I won't even know if it's called racism or anything. I'll just feel like, oh, maybe the person doesn't like me. Until when I started working in, there's one place I was working in, and so my employer actually woke up to me and told me that, oh, my accent sound rude to customers, so they won't be needing my service anymore. And I'm like, how does my accent sound rude to customers? So that kind of made me, because I felt so bad, and I was like, so you are trying to discriminate me because of my accent, because I'm talking as a normal human being like you, so I don't know how my accent sounds rude. And most people that know me already know me that, oh, Precious, you have a very calm voice. You can't, even when I'm speaking in school, they're like, oh, speak louder, we can't hear you. So how can you not tell me my accent sound rude? I would say I was actually depressed with the statement, but I didn't let that get to me, and because I know I'm not rude. My accent doesn't sound rude, so I didn't really let it get to me. And so when I went to meet Tasha and I spoke with her, so she actually encouraged me. Tasha, and there's another lady called Christina, I think, yeah, Christina, yeah. So they spoke with me, and they actually calmed me down. They motivated me a lot of ways. So I was very, happy. So what I'm saying this is that we should try and come together. They should try and, like, because racism is a killer of dreams. No matter how I want to say it kills dreams, because when you discriminate and exclude people out of because of their color of skin or anything, you are trying to push out treasures, because there are some people that have talent. You are scaring the talent away from them. You are trying to, like, hide them of that talent and deprive them of bringing out their creativity and exploring their self in the society. So that's what I have to say. And inclusion is very important, like creating a community center in all communities to welcome everyone, especially young teens and young adults that are relocating from other parts of the world, from other countries, especially Africans, and coming in. So it's very good because it actually makes them feel comfortable in the country and it makes them feel happy. So that's all I have to say. And there's a word that I actually has a word that ended it, like the only race we have in the human race, which is scientifically proven. Every other race outside this race is called racism, which is the killer of the human race. Thanks very much.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Precious. That was absolutely wonderful. Thank you so much. And I think just something to learn from that is that we're all affected by racism, because if racism is killing somebody's dreams, if racism is making somebody depressed, social cohesion doesn't exist. And that ripples right through society. So thank you so much, Precious. So without further ado now, I will bring on our next contributor, Frank Owusu. Frank is a wonderful person within our community. Everybody in the community knows him because he's constantly there to help others. Frank, when he didn't have anything to do, was certainly. Can I just ask? Am I breaking up?
No.
No, okay. It's looked like it on the screen. Frank volunteered in the resource centre for a long time, helping us with all sorts of issues. But he is a really welcoming, good, decent human being. I always think of somebody, if your car broke down in the middle of nowhere, who would you ring? And Frank would be one of those people I would ring, because I know he would help. And he's that kind of person. So without further ado, I will hand over to Frank for his contribution. Thanks, Frank.
You're on mute, Frank.
Frank, you're on mute. Yeah.
You're still on mute.
You're fine now. Go ahead. Oh no, you're still, Frank. We still have struggling to hear you, Frank. No, it's not working.
Just.
Frank is unmuted, but his sound doesn't seem to be working.
Frank, have you tested your, if you go to, you see where it says the video on the bottom left of your screen? You go to video settings. And then go to audio. Can you hear me, Frank? I can't hear you. Frank, I'm just going to ring you. I tell you what we'll do.
The next speaker.
Yeah, exactly, yeah. So I'm going to hand over to my colleague, Elska, now, who will introduce our next speaker. Are you there, Elska?
Hello? Hello, can you hear me?
Yes, yeah. Thanks, Elska. Yeah, go ahead.
I'm outdoors, so apologies if there's a bit of wind here in the background.
It's all good.
I'm going to introduce our next speaker, Islamia Sadiq Kadejo, who is also from Nigeria. And Islamia has been absolutely amazing. She has been involved with the Art Centre over the past 5 years now. Originally, she started as a part of her placement on gender studies. She became very involved with helping to organise for the Africa Day event. And she set up a fantastic exhibition that year around debusting myths around Africa. And Islamia is the founder and director of AMDAF, the Amdala Africa Foundation. And she's currently working with us and involved with family support and community development work in the Art Centre. So Islamia can tell you a bit more about what she's doing. She's really involved. She's so active in the community, and she's actually setting up a community radio station at the moment also. So I'll hand you over to Islamia. Thank you, Islamia.
Thanks, Elska.
Hello, everybody. Good afternoon. It's a pleasure to be here. I'll quickly talk about racism, like I've been asked to talk about, but I'll focus more on inclusion and how we can tackle racism. The typical example of racism or how it makes you feel as a person, as a victim, is just exactly what happened to Frank just now. When you are speaking and you are not heard, when you are in a dark place, you are making efforts, you have all the passion, like Precious, you have all the talent, like everyone is gifted, but yet you are not seen, you are not heard, you are not anywhere. Yet you know you are there and you know what you are capable of doing, you know your values. Like Frank's audio was on, but there was a technical issue, but we couldn't hear him. And that is exactly what racism does for you. It just demoralizes you. It affects your mental health. It just doesn't make anything work. And that is why we have to do something about racism. Nobody should be judged or treated or hurt based on the skin, the color of their skin, based on their religious faith, religious belief, even nationality or even disability. Like Precious said, the only race we should recognize is human race. Apart from that, we should call it out. And when I say call it out, let us look at the OUT. The O in calling it out will be to offer support. And that is the main support will be in appreciating diversity and celebrating our differences. Like when I walk into any place, like the majority of, like everybody there is white and I'm the only Black, probably the only one covered, the only Muslim there, you cannot but see me because I am different. So rather than disassociate yourself or make me feel bad, we should celebrate that difference. I should not let my difference shut me up or remove me from whatever I want to do or devalue me. The best thing is to make good use of it. So when you are calling out racism, you offer support. And the main support we can all offer as everybody here today is inclusion. But inclusion is not just saying everyone is welcome. Everyone is allowed. Racism is like, okay, there's a party, everybody should be there and you don't invite me. But inclusion is you invite me to that party, but there inclusion will be to offer me a share, serve me food, and ask me to dance. So when we are talking about inclusion, inclusion is not just about, okay, everyone is welcome, you can do what you want, fine. Inclusion is making the minority part of decision making because every decision affects everybody. We are the ethnic and racial minorities in Ireland is just 12%. We are not saying that the minorities take over anywhere, no. We are just saying that I want to see me, that 12% in the media, in banks, among the guards, in politics, in schools. You know, I want my children to go out and see that representation. We need to transform inclusion to representation. That is when we can say inclusion is working for us. And that is what my organization, AMDAF, is doing by starting this, the first ethnic minority interest community radio in Galway, because we want to break the barrier of underrepresentation in mainstream Irish media. we want to promote languages because we understand not everybody will have that perfect accent or that, you know, that will just be what a definition of being perfect. I am a trained broadcaster from Nigeria, but when I came here, I couldn't get a job because my accent was not, or is still not perfect enough. You know, with the community radio my organization is working on, we don't mind whatever your accent is, whatever your language is. We just want you to have a say on issues that affect you. And that is the kind of inclusion everybody here present this afternoon that want to appeal to us to start thinking about. It is not just saying you are welcome. It is really making the ethnic minorities part of decisions that affect them. The you in calling it out will be to understand racism, to know racism is real and understand, and not just be like we are just saying it. Understand that racism kills. Racism can just make you down, can depress you, can affect everything. You can leave your original country of birth full of hope, full of passion, brilliant. You know, you have a goal, you have everything. But when you get here and you are affected by racism, you just forget everything. You just don't care anymore. That is why we need to understand racism and the need to tackle it. And kudos to our Justice Minister for the good news yesterday when she said that will be hate crime legislation. That is huge, that is superb, that is exactly what we are talking about. The police, the guards needs to have tools that they will use against whoever treated anybody or judged them based on their color, disability, religion, or nationality. And lastly, we'll be tackling racism as a person. The first step will be to report it, to shame it, and to teach love, because no one is born racist. They learn it. So if they can as well learn racism, we can as well teach love. We can as well teach inclusion. We can as well celebrate diversity. We can as well celebrate our differences. That is the best way to tackle it. And for every person of ethnic minority that is here today, that is watching, I want to just make this analogy. If I have this 50 euro notes for anybody who may want it. If I want to give this out as a gift, I would say, okay, do you want it? I'm sure we all love money anyway. If someone offers me Islamia, do you want 15 naira? No, do you need it? I'll say, fine, I need it. But now let me do this. Assuming I'm not going to stamp on it, but just assume I just stamped on this naira notes. I just spit on it and clean it up. Let me fold it. Like, you know, make it rough, make it look bad and all of that. Then after this, doing whatever I like, rub it in the mud, making it look dirty. I still want to present it to Kitty, to Kathleen, maybe Brian. Will you still take the 50 naira note from me? Sure, you will still, despite the fact that you have seen all the things I did to it, but what I did to this 50 euro note doesn't devalue the 50 euro note, doesn't devalue doesn't take anything from the value of this euro, of this 50 euro. That is exactly how I want us to view racism. You will be devalued, people will stamp on you, people will spit on you, people will say a lot of hateful things to you. But if you know your value remains what it is. You are still you, and you can achieve anything you want to achieve. If despite all I've done to this 50 euro, I still take it to Tesco and it remains a legal tender, I can still get something in Tesco, in Aldi, anywhere with the 50 euro note, then why should I be bothered with what anybody says to me like, your accent is not good enough, you are too dark, why are you covered? Why are you covered? Are you not feeling hot? It's summer, for God's sake, can you just remove this? That I know me. I know what I want. I know my goal. I know my passion in life. I know what I'm capable of doing. So I want to speak to the likes of me, the likes of Precious, the younger ones that are still coming up, that people would try to devalue you. They will say a lot of horrible things to you, but then your value should remain your value. Just like the value of this 50 euro notes has not changed despite everything I have done to it. And I want to say thank you for the opportunity to express myself here today, to be heard. For me, representation is key. For me, having a voice is everything. Having a voice is also everything, is powerful. It is very important. And I want to appreciate you for giving us a voice on your platform today. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much indeed. Paul?
Thank you so much, Isla. That was really powerful. I just want to share a little bit story before I introduce Frank. And if this means anything to anybody, this very same former mayor that I mentioned earlier, I was stood in the resource centre with him once, looking out over the estates. And I said, what do you see there? What do you see out there? And he said, I see a lot of people that are draining the Irish state of welfare, which was obviously a disgusting comment. And I said, you know what I see? I see a lot of people that are trying their best to raise the children in a better society. And they're the kind of people that we should be embracing. And I stand by that with every single person that we deal with in Dahishka. The people that are trying to raise their children in such a good way, to give them a better education, to give them a better standard of living. And we should be embracing that as a society. They're the kind of people that can really help Ireland flourish in the future. So with that, and it just struck me as you were talking that that conversation that I had, you're very valued, as you know, from our point of view, and everybody should be valued. So I'll now hand over to Frank, and hopefully we've sorted out the technical issues. If we haven't, we do have a plan B. So over to you, Frank.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, perfectly, Frank. Thank you.
Everybody can hear me. All right, thank you. Now I have to use my phone because I'm so sorry for this, what actually happened. I know it's part of technology and it do happen. Thank you. My name is Frank Ozu, born in Ghana, raised in Ghana. So I came to Ireland here 2008. And you know where I come from, Ghana obviously is part of our West Coast. And we know a lot about slavery and kind of discriminations and racism. We do understand all these things. And we are very fortunate. As one time I wanted to come to Ireland, I realized I have to read a little bit about Ireland. And I noticed that, oh, Ireland was not part of the slavery system. So I was so delighted and so happy to know the country I am coming in. Have I been experiencing racism? Oh, many times. But as a man, you grown. You take some of the things which is good, and you take some of the things which is bad, and you move on. But what we're trying to advocate here is to ensure that our children, because they were born here in Ireland, and they are Irish, so they have to be what? Part of the country growth, either politically, either economically, either any institution. So we are now saying that we want our children and the parents to be part of what Ireland is building. I came in mostly in 2015. I walked into the Art Resource Center, and by then I didn't know what to do. So fortunately for me, I met Paul, I met Natasha, I met Eska and Martina, and including Bill Amon. And these people were so much good that they're able to add me, include me. I'm talking about inclusion now. They included me to their place of work. And they involved me to say, Frank, this is what is going to happen. African Day is coming. Will you be included? So what I'm saying is the parents in this island here who are giving birth to these kids, the government, the institutions, everywhere, they should include these parents so that our children not mess with their mind and seeing the teacher who is white, and then they come home and they don't see the difference between the parents, and they bring in problem to their parents at home. Is it marriage equality? Yes. How are we fighting it? We have a type of equalities that we have a natural equality, which means to imply that all men are born free and equal. We have a social equality, we have civil equality, and we have political equalities, we have economic, and we have what equality of opportunity and education. So this is where we want to be. We want to be equal opportunity, have equal education, so that our kids who are born here will be able to stand this intensity and this the diversity what people are moving ourselves into. I was part of the group who sat for the 3 days to ensure that Galway 2020 comes on. I had a privilege to have all these things. Now I work with Avaya as an IT op. I have friends who are having a certificate, and unfortunately, their degree are not accepted here in Ireland. So they have to sit home. I know it's beyond, but all of us can able to help. All of us people here can know that there is an issue, but the issue has to be addressed. So how do we have to address all these things? You know, settle the clear rules in regard to how people should be treated. Challenge any negative activities or attitude. Treat everyone equal. Create all inclusive culture for schools so that we can see that our children will be the future for Ireland. And avoid stereotypes of examples at some resources and say, oh, his language is not like other two speakers mentioned. We have to use resources with multicultural so that we can stand as an Irish. And we'll be proud to see different minority, different backgrounds going to the Olympics, going to playing football and come home with medals. I'm so glad that we have this platform that many people are very aware, or those who are not aware. Today, it is something that we don't want a black kid like in 1918, somewhere around 18 something. There's a guy called Paddy Murphy. When Paddy was speaking Irish, he's a black man but speaking Irish. He was getting laughed. They were laughing at him because they believed that he was mocking. Now the children at school now learning Irish. So we want everyone to be in the same page so that they will be included. Every parent will be included. I had the opportunity, I remember my last point when I went to the school for the PTA meeting, and there was they want to vote for a chairperson and then resource person. And then all of a sudden there was a lady sitting down there said, I know this man. A white lady pointed and said, I know this man, he can do something better. Before I see in my eyes, I was voted as a chairperson at the Huiska Mellingwood Primary School. It is all about you see from us that make difference. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Frank. Thank you very much indeed, Frank. Paul, did you want to come back in there?
Just briefly, I think just to say, I think every day in my work, I'm honoured to be working with such amazing people that bring such a richness to our culture, to this country, to society, to the area that I live in and work in. I think there's one question that we should all be constantly asking each other, and that is, how can we make a difference? Because we can make a difference. Sometimes it's just a smile, it's just a hello. It's as simple as that. To make somebody feel involved and included, it's just so important. So I'm just so grateful for our three speakers today for sharing that. We're constantly learning, and we need to keep learning. And I'm so grateful that we were afforded from our Family Resource Centre, which we're all part of, this platform today to speak to everybody. So thank you.
Paul, thank you indeed. And not just to Paul, but to Natasha, Precious, Frank, Islamaya, and Elska, who all made a very valuable contribution. And just looking at some of the comments in the chat, people are just delighted. And if I go back maybe to something that Kevin said towards the end of his input, where he said is really, we need to be paying, or that paying attention is the beginning of ethical action. To do this, we must pay attention to those in front of us. And when I heard Precious speak at the beginning, she spoke about a loneliness which caught me. I just didn't think of such a thing at all. But she also mentioned how she kind of hid away her voice. Well, I think, Precious, today you certainly didn't do that. You did an absolutely wonderful job in being heard and making a real difference. I think, Islamaya, I think when you spoke and when we heard that you might be on the radio, that has to cheer us up, because you are such a passionate speaker. And even the whole idea of how you brought us together with regards to the €50 note, which I still haven't managed to get from you, but you have to say you did it very well in the sense that you are entreating us and you're asking us that we must know our own value, that we are still ourselves. And if you go back to even what Precious has said, where racism is the killer of dreams, which is such a big statement, particularly for people who are so young. And then if we were to look at Frank, and Frank is so passionate about making things different but better to include specifically for the children that are there. I think the work that's going on in Duisca, which Paul referred to as being particularly disenfranchised and increasingly diverse, but also what struck me was the fact that they just can't get DESH status. Like, how can an area like Duisca, with all its diversity, not be entitled to a DESH status? And we can't say that the algorithm is racism. It's not the algorithm. It has to be the people or the situation or the institution. And I heard that from Frank, that there is a certain institutional racism that must be challenged. We heard a proud voice. We heard a passionate voice. We heard a young voice. We heard an entreating voice. We heard all of it was underpinned by Kevin earlier this morning. And some of the questions that were asked earlier on by Anne-Marie, by Pia, by Ronan, and even the paying attention as mentioned by Lily earlier, those questions that came in between the two sets of speakers certainly set us up to hear Islamaya, Precious, Frank, and Paul. So Paul at the very end there asked us to consider the question, how it is that we can make a difference. A really big question. But he did mention something as simple as a smile, a thought, a nod, or perhaps it can be more. So as we come to the end, given that we're not going to, we won't be breaking into the groups, but what I would like to do at this stage is maybe to ask those people, and there were an awful lot of people, I have to say, I noticed all the people clapping their hands when people spoke at the last section, but maybe if somebody would like to comment on maybe how they think we could make a difference, or maybe to comment on what stays with them or moves them or what challenges them about what they heard in the second segment today. I can see Precious has her hand up there. Would you like to say something, Precious? If you'd like to comment, do. Thank you.
Oh, yeah, I have something to say. I just want to say that stereotype is more like, I think is the main factor for racism. But when I first came to Ireland, people say, oh, they what they call them again? The other part of Irish, what's it called again? The travelers, yeah.
Okay.
The travelers are troublesome and this. But when I had there's one traveler when I was in Maryland, there's one girl, she's a traveler. The way she spoke to me, I have to ask her, where are you Irish? She said, yeah, she's a traveler. And I was shocked because I already had a single story of saying travelers are troublesome. So what I would say, how we can make a difference is that we shouldn't base our decisions on stereotypes like single story from people. Like, we are all different. It's not because of the color of our skin, or we have different, our personalities are different, and it's based on us individual, not on our race or skin or culture or anything, or religion. It's based, your character is defined by your own personality, not by your race, not by anything. So we can make a difference by, you have to move close to people. No matter what you heard about the particular, you have to move close to people to know about them. You don't define people by what you hear, but what you know about them. That's my own. We shouldn't judge people by what they portrayed by their race or their culture or their religious anything, but our experience with them. That's what.
Thank you very much, Precious. You're not just Precious in name, but thank you very much indeed. That's absolutely wonderful. And it strikes back to what Ismail was saying about transforming inclusion into representation, and not enough to say you are welcome. There has to be much more than that in inclusion. If anybody else would like to come in and is there any hands up there? Am I missing somebody? Just let me travel through the screens here. Somebody might have their hands up.
I see Sister Teresa Horgan.
Oh, Teresa, come in there, please. Thanks, Teresa.
The way Frank became chairperson of the Board of Management in the local primary school, I think this kind of inclusion in a small job to begin with gives people a sense of belonging. In something small, they're included. And it is a great idea. And we all need to do more politically also for inclusion.
Thanks, Teresa. That's the message too. I think that Kevin, when he was speaking earlier on, came in at the end and said how really we have to make the difference, even if it's like political lobbying or at local level, I think is what he mentioned. I'm glad to say we have a new white paper on direct provision that announces the end of direct provision, but we have yet to see the detail of that, and a timeline would be really helpful also. Is there anybody else would like to come in? Concept, to go ahead.
I suppose as one who has been over just on a visit to the centre, there was an opening and the Minister Staunton was there on that day, and his comment was if we could replicate this centre in other parts of the country. Now, I don't think it has happened, but we have a new phrase now, social friendship. Yeah. And I was just listening, Precious very briefly touched on it because it was about a relationship, and I think she mentioned Sister Chanel, who met her and introduced her to Natasha, and these are talking about making a difference. That's, you know, I can see that, and from where we go from there. But it is about social friendship to begin with, but not end there, as Islamia said also around not just making people feel welcome, but we have to go, as we say in Ireland, that extra mile. So thanks to everybody. From now on, I'm just going to work.
Thanks, Concepta. I think you hit the nail on the head. Somebody's machine there doing dreadful things. I think you hit the nail on the head when you mentioned relationships, and I think even looking at this particular encyclical Fratelli Tutti, there's a whole concept of looking at relationship, which is built upon, if you like, Laudato Si, which again is about relationship. And if you were to listen to anything that was said by any of the speakers this morning, the whole idea of looking and reflecting back on how we maintain our relationships, how rich they are, how well we are within the relationships, or how well we invigilate our own ideas about what it is to include and to make sure that those around us are belonging and included. I'm just going to, before we hand over to finally finish up to Sister Helen, I'm just going to ask if anybody else would like to come in and...
Brian, there's a hand there by Mary Oyediran, but also I sent you a direct message about the reflection before Sister Helen, maybe.
Okay, yeah. And did you say, is it Sister Mary's hand as well?
There is Mary Oyediran who has
a hand. Okay, Mary, if you'd like to come in, go ahead. Yeah.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes, go ahead.
So thank you so much for the opportunity. I really am so grateful for all the chat and the desire for us to do something. But I want to bring us back to something that is very simple. To me, is very simple. When I say that, that's not being derogatory in any way. And it's like, we are really called as the human race to treat each other as we would like to be treated. That is really the simplicity of it all. Racism is stemmed in race, in hate, and being afraid of a stranger that you don't know. But when you begin to treat others as you would like to be treated in any situation, you begin to find you could actually get to know your neighbor, get to know people that are different from you. I came into Near FM 2019, that's a community radio station. And one of the things that they taught me, especially the coordinator, Kira Murray, was that every time he saw me, I was new to the organization. I had done the training. And they have their culture as a radio, which is true. Every organization has their culture. But he made it a point when he saw me in the kitchen, he would always come up wherever he saw me and extend a hand of encouragement, a mouth of encouragement and a hand of welcome. He would take his, if he's sitting somewhere, he would come and sit next to me. How are you? How are you getting on? How can we help you? And then one day I had a conversation with him. He said something which I hope I can leave. He said, I don't want my children to inherit a racist island. So whatever I could do now, I need to do. So all of us, it doesn't have to be to make a big policy. Those policies are important. I value what happened yesterday. But each one of us, if we would treat one another as we would like to be treated, we're going to find a major difference on a local level, at a grassroots level. That community, neighbors, you begin to treat your neighbor the way you want to be treated. If you moved into another country, I mean, there's 70 million Irish people outside of Ireland. Now that's said a lot for Irish people. 70 million more than in the country, because you've been all over the place and they didn't kill you off. They didn't destroy you. You eventually had a way to be president in America. And so therefore, if we would extend that beautiful notion that Jesus Christ, treat each other as we would like to be, treat yourself, treat others, as you would like to be treated. How would you like to be treated if somebody just came to your neighborhood, if you just went to somebody's neighborhood? That's all I want to say. Thank you very much for a wonderful opportunity.
Thank you very much indeed, Mary. And I suppose we'll leave you with the last word when you say really that what you're asking us to do is to extend the hand of welcome and encouragement, which I think is what Paul does in Duisca along with his colleagues, as well as our three fantastic speakers that we had from Duisca, and also to Kevin, who set the scene this morning. Just before we head off, what we might ask you to do just for 30 seconds is thereabouts, is if you might put in the chat just a word or two about what stays with you, what disturbed you, what challenges you. Because in that way we would get a good flavour from everybody, because we can actually save the chat to and put it together as part of a resource for all of you. And at that, once we have done that, you can take your time doing that, even thinking about it, because we will leave the Zoom open for a little while afterwards for people to continue to have a little chat themselves as they did before we started. And while you're thinking about what you might write, I'm going to invite Sister Helen, if she would like to come in at this stage and to close the proceedings. But for my part, I thank absolutely everybody for their preparation, for their attention to detail, for taking the time to make the difference. So Sister Helen, if you'd unmute there and you can come in. Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you, Brian. It's still staying with me what Islamia said. No one is born racist. So I think our education system, our family values have to stress that no one is born racist. And I certainly feel challenged and hopefully enthused in my efforts in my work for justice. And it's just reminding me of the two disciples on the road to Emmaus. The way they were enthused. And what they did was they turned back to their work and immediately went back to Jerusalem with the good news. So I hope that we will all, in our own little way, follow up. And I'd like to remind you of what Pope Francis said. Let us not do this alone as individuals. The Samaritan discovered an innkeeper who would care for the man. We too are called to unite as a family that is stronger than the sum of the small individual parts. For the whole is greater than the part, but it is also greater than the sum of its parts. So a huge thank you to the speakers who enthused us, who challenged us. And I won't start naming them again, but I'd like to say a very special word of thanks to Brian, who so expertly managed the whole thing. And Marianne, it was a happy fault because we, you know, not going out into chat rooms, just speaking openly in forum and getting the immediate answers from Frank and Paul and the speakers proved very fruitful. So thank you all very much. I hope you found it as fruitful as I did. Thank you. Over to you, Brian.
Thank you very much indeed, Helen. And that, my friends, concludes the North East Province Justice Day on inclusion, inequality and racism. And I think you're right, Helen, when you say that it's a happy fault, because I suppose by going into the groups, we may not have been as inclusive as we had hoped to be. So sometimes things happen for a reason. So what we'll do now for the moment is, if you get a chance, you might put a word or two into the chat about what you got from this morning, maybe what challenged you or what stays with you. And while you're doing that, we'll leave the Zoom open for a little while so that those people who've gathered from near and far, who haven't had the chance to meet because of lockdown, had a great 20 minutes or half an hour chatting with friends they haven't seen, that can continue for another little while. And it might even prompt you to pick up the phone later on the day or during the week to have a chat with somebody who you'd like to chat with, but you only got to see for a second on this Zoom. So once again, thank you all indeed for turning up in your numbers. And we've had a constant nearly 100 people online all morning. So maybe I'll stop now and I'll allow you to get on with your chatting in the chat box and your chats across the Zoom. So thank you all so much for everything this morning. Take care.
Thanks, Brian. Thanks everybody from the Northern Province who organised all this.
Thanks very much.
Very welcome, Miriam.
Enjoy your afternoon, Miriam.
And you too. Oh, I have a tough afternoon ahead of me. Okay, Consulta, I'll talk to you someday on.
Okay, Will. Yeah, mind yourself.
On email. Yeah. Okay, bless you.
Take care. It's lovely to see you.
Thank you all.
Yeah.
Thanks a lot.
Thank you very much.
Lovely.
Thanks to everyone.
Thanks,
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you to everyone for participating. Great.
Thank you, everybody.
So many of you.
Thanks very much.
Wonderful presentation.
Kevin, thanks very much indeed.
Indeed, yes.
Thank you, everybody.
All.
Thank you very much.
And again.
Thank you to everybody from Southwest Province, and thank you to Brian for playing a blinder again.
Thank you, Maureen. You're very good.
Commission.
Thanks, Maureen.
Superb.
Thanks to everybody from Fort Lawn.
Thanks, Anne.
Thank you. You're welcome.
Very good. Very good.
Great morning. Lovely. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Lovely to see Joe too.